Hello and welcome to the ninth episode of A More Than Human Conversation. I have finally got Sarah from Sarah Reads on here. I've been wanting to have you on for a long time now. Um, you know, Ka works and the moves on. So finally, the way of the beam has brought you to my interview. Uh,
I'm excited.
I love that quote that you had posted up from your yearbook. I mean, that's awesome. That's like the nerdiest awesome quote ever to have.
Probably the nerdiest.
I love it. So I like to start these off by knowing who got you into reading. Who was like the person who's like really is like, hey, let's sit down and start you on this path of reading, great books.
Well, I usually credit both of my parents. So my mom taught me how to read, and I have very like distinct memories of that process. It was with like those early reader books. They still sell them, but the one that I had like way back when was called "I Like My Room Messy," which I think
Okay.
my mom bought because I was a messy kid, and I'm still a messy adult. But I do remember learning to read from that book. But then it was my dad who helped me fall in love with reading. So he was always reading, and I like the same kinds of things that he likes. And so then we
Okay.
would read books like often at the same time. So like I would read a couple of chapters, and then I guess when I was asleep, like he would read part of them as well, or reread part of them if it was a book he had already read, and then we would talk about it. And that was my early reading experience.
That is super cool. I think you might be the first person who's said that like you and your, parents like actually talked about the reading afterwards.
Mhm.
That's interesting. So what kind of conversations would you have? Were you having like AP Canavan style stuff, like breaking down why things were done? Or
No, definitely not. I remember, so I don't remember all of the conversations, but I do remember when I read Watership Down for the first time, because that is one of my favorite books. And so we did this, and my dad had already read Watership Down like a bunch of times, but we were doing this with it. And so I was reading it, and I actually was supposed to be reading it before bed and then like going to sleep and turning off my light and stuff. And I remember reading a part. Have you ever read Watership Down?
no, I haven't, but I need to because I know it's like one of your favorite all time books. I know it's in your top, at least your top 10, right? At
Totally.
least
Yeah,
the
I love
first.
it. I love it. It is probably my favorite book ever. But there is there's a seagull character. So the characters are rabbits for anybody who's never heard Watership Down, but there is a seagull character that they meet during the book, and he has like a little bit of a foul mouth. Like I say foul in it is I didn't even get the pun at first, but that's funny. But for a kid's book, he says like a very minor swear word, and I remember reading it and like being in bed, and I was a kid who did not like to break rules. Like I did not like to get in trouble, and so I was reading this chapter, and then there was this bad word, or what I thought was a bad word, and I was like, oh no. So I remember like walking over to my dad's room and being like, dad. He was like, what? I was like, I
I
read a
love it.
bad word. He was like, what
What
is
do I
it?
do?
What do I do? Am I in trouble? You gave me this. This was your fault. So
I
I
love it.
remember talking about that, but usually it was just like, oh, did you like this part? I remember. Have you ever read The Talisman?
Uh, I've started the Talisman. I have not finished it yet, but I was just looking at Andrew over here wanting our top five King recommendations. I knew we would get around to that.
But there's like a pretty emotional part in The Talisman, and so that was one that I distinctly remember like it happening, and then us talking about it the next day, and me being like, why do these things have to happen? So it was mostly just like more content. Like we were not it was not literary theory. It was just like emotions mostly.
That's great. So what would be your top five if you were going to recommend King?
Yeah, totally. So I have weird like top king books like that people are like, what? Why is that there? So the Gunslinger from the Dark Tower, which is almost unanimously, after Song of Susanna, everybody's least favorite, and like the book that prevents people from even getting into the series. I actually love The Gunslinger. It is
Thank
like
you.
probably
Thank
my favorite
you.
Dark Tower book, along with Wizard and Glass, which is like a much more popular favorite. But just one of my favorite books ever. It's one of the books that I've read the most often. I really reread the most. So The Gunslinger, his nonfiction on writing, one of my favorite works of nonfiction. I think that that's phenomenal. If you enjoy his work, if you like writing, if you like Stephen King, like it's got things for everybody. I'm still gonna say The Talisman, even though I haven't read it in a really long time, and I'm so hesitant to reread it because so many people hate it. Like Mike read it and was like, "This is terrible. Why do you all like this?" And I'm scared to go back and reread it because it was one of like the formative books for me. Like I read it at a really young age. It was my first Stephen King book, so it's still in my heart. I know you hate Wizard and Glass, Andrew, but I can understand why you do, because I know the things that you don't like, and there's some weird stuff in that book. So those three for sure. And then I would say that it is there. It is definitely one of my favorites. And then it's really a toss-up. I do really love The Stand, but I also really love Pet Sematary. Like I will never reread Pet Sematary because it broke something in me when I read it. Like it hurt me and scared me, and like I don't know that I could ever reread that book, but it's so good. Like if you are going to get into Stephen King, you really do have to read it.
Yeah, I am right there with you. I'm so glad. I know I've heard you say it before, but I'm so glad to hear that you love The Gunslinger so much, because I feel like I'm out here on an island and I'm just like, Gunslinger's my favorite. Like I especially on the like, because I read it twice before I came to BookTube, and that's actually how I first did my like first ever videos. Like they asked me, "Oh, come on and like we'll talk about the Dark Tower and stuff."
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, by the time I jumped on their discussion, I was like book 3 or something. But I just recently reread The Gunslinger, and I was like, I've read a lot of fantasy since I read this last. Maybe I won't think as much of it. And I'm like, it's still amazing. And this might even be better on a reread because the context of
Totally.
How it went. And I'm just like, yeah, whoever doesn't like The Gunslinger, I was like, you can have your opinion. It's wrong, but you can have it.
You're entitled to your wrong opinion.
And also another one, I really liked Carrie. Like
Yeah,
I really liked it. And a lot of people, even King himself is like kind of down on Carrie. He's like, it's the first one out the gate. I'm just like, I love the way he set the book up, where because you have a little bit of this in Dracula too, where they do like kind of like news clippings off to the side as you're going through, and they're like, oh, the event that happened. I love that kind of, that he does meta that way just wonderfully.
Yes, and he has continued to do that. That is something that has stuck with him throughout his entire career.
His Dark Tower meta was way meta.
Absolutely.
Love me some me, but and another one that I think I'm not gonna say it's up there towards the top of the best, but one that I think is underrated is Cujo. Like
I actually like Cujo too. I know Cujo gets a lot of hate, but I do like it.
Like I think it's one of his best. I mean, if anybody's read more than a couple of Stephen King books, they know that he likes to go off on these tangents and write a book on the side almost. Mm-hmm. But like he does that so perfectly in Cujo, where you get like the whole family dynamics on two different sides and how it all kind of floats together, and it works at the end. Like it's horrible, but it works at the end.
It's horrible,
especially as a parent, because I didn't read it until a couple of years ago, and being a parent, I'm just like, oh Lord, how do you do this, Stephen?
It hurts. It is hard, and like whether you like Cujo or you don't like Cujo, because it is one that I think a lot of people don't enjoy. I think it speaks to Stephen King's capabilities as a writer that you can write a book that takes place over that period of time, because you write, so like how difficult is it to maintain tension over a period of just like a couple of hours. Like there's a reason that those locked room stories are hard to pull off, because you have to keep people engaged in something that is taking place over such a short period of time.
Yeah, and I'm actually finishing my fourth book, which is a short story collection, and the final story is like that. It takes place in just a couple hours, and I'm like, this is really hard to make,
To pull together.
everything, seem like a real life pace.
Mhm.
And Stephen King is amazing. And that's another thing. Like when I first came on to BookTube, there was, because there's ebbs and flows through BookTube. Different things become popular to talk about, and one of the things was like Stephen King is not a great writer was going around, and I'm like, huh. And I'd only read The Dark Tower, and I'm like, if you've read The Dark Tower, he's a good writer. I'm like, maybe I'm missing stuff. And then that's when I kind of went on that, like, I'm reading like 4 or 5 other Stephen King books, and I'm like,
Mhm.
who are these people? Who are these people that are like, oh, he's not? They must. I mean, I hate to use the word, but like haters, like it just must be like, oh, he's just popular, so he must not be good. Like, where do you think that comes from? Do you think they have any valid points to it?
I think so. I think those are two different questions. So, number one, I think that we are a bit of an insular. Hey, everybody! I know it's been forever since I've seen anyone, since I've talked. I've just been here, living summer. But I think like we are in a pretty insular part of BookTube, in that a lot of us read science fiction, fantasy, and so the things that we expect out of a book might be different than people who only read literary fiction. And there are some authors who become so popular that they break out of those genre conventions and everybody ends up reading something by them. Like there are just authors because there's just a book lying around in your house or at the library or somewhere. So even if your taste is totally outside what that genre is, you're probably going to pick up a book by this person just because they are so astronomically popular. So I think that's going to attract people who only read a certain kind of writing or who only think that a certain kind of writing is good. And then they're going to criticize Stephen King for not being those things that they're looking for or those things that they feel are worthwhile in the literary sphere. So I think probably if you polled a lot of people who read science fiction, fantasy, horror, they would say, no, I think Stephen King, I think he writes well, at least decently. I don't think you get a lot of people who are like, oh, he's total crap, what a hack. They might not like him, or they might not like his work, but I don't think you get as much of that. But just because it is so popular, I think that, you're going to find people who are going to say that because they probably think that about a lot of genre fiction. And we don't think that about a lot of genre fiction. And, then you have to kind of deconstruct and think about like, well, what makes writing good? Is it technical proficiency? Is it pacing? Is it the ability to evoke emotions or maintain tension or create a character that feels realistic? Like there's so many different things that you can look at. And I think Stephen King is great at a lot of those things. The subtle nuances of literary fiction and that kind of look inside a person and what makes personhood and what's the value of life. Like, is that what you're going to get out of a Stephen King novel? No, but I don't think that's why you go into a Stephen King novel either. And actually you can probably argue that there is some of that in some of his work, especially The Dark Tower, right? So I don't know. I think you're just going to find people who, number one, like to dislike things because
Yes.
that's a common thing to do is disliking things. But I do think that he writes well. Is he the most technically proficient writer in the world? No. He will, make fun of himself all the time for his use of adverbs and, sentence structure. And we've also, because he took off at such a young age, we've also seen a huge breadth of work from him. And so
You
the
can
entire
find some stinkers in there if you want
right?
to. And I was
Exactly.
like, if you write 70 books, they're not all going to be the best thing you've ever written,
Totally.
But the one criticism of Stephen King that I can give to people, and it's like, he goes off on tangents. Sometimes they don't matter.
Yes.
I know a lot of people who, and Andrew hates Wizard and Glass. It's like, he writes the length of an entire other book outside of the story that we were coming into. It's like backstory, or you see a cashier as they're walking by, and he's gonna tell you, and then like, it's like the movie where they zoom into their eyes and they're like, oh, what happened to you for the last week? And you're like, just so you can kill them, and it makes us feel something for them when they die. Like, I don't know, but but other than that, I mean, I think he's great, and I think to me, as I've got into more fantasy, like everybody appreciates good prose. Like, there's nobody that's like, oh, like Steven Erikson. No one's going to crap on Steven Erikson's prose or George R.R. Martin. But as I've got through more, like, to me, I'd rather have you have like average prose and tell me an amazing story. Tell me like Stephen King with characters, like make me care about the characters. Like Stephen King definitely has better than average prose, but I can handle average prose, amazing character work. That's what I'm looking for now as I've got into more fantasy.
As it changes. For me, it just depends on what I'm reading. I can sometimes be a little bit snobby, but it really depends on what I'm reading. Because I remember early in BookTube when I was talking about someone's prose. It might not have even been that early. I think it was maybe I was talking about Fonda Lee.
Oh.
And I was like, I don't like this certain thing that Fonda Lee does. And look at Evie coming out.
Unpopular opinion there.
And then at the same time, I was reading this like rom-com. And so I was like, how can you say that this is not good, but you're also reading this? I'm like, well, I'm looking for different things when I'm reading different types of books. Like when I pick up a rom-com, I expect a certain style of writing, and B, will acclimate to that style, even if like for the first couple of pages it feels a little bit stilted, or like it might not flow as well as I would like it to. But I look for different things in different types of books, so I don't go into all of them expecting the same thing. So I can be a little bit prose snobby sometimes. I really do like it when the writing is nice, but I also don't require it.
Yeah, well, and I think you nailed it where you said, as you pick up a book, you read the back of the book and you're like, okay, this is the genre, so I'm expecting a certain type, of writing. Like, if the back of the book says it's Tolkien-esque and we're doing an epic fantasy that's supposed to be set in medieval times, I'm gonna kind of expect your prose to be somewhat flowery or purple prose to an extent,
right?
But so what was the first fantasy book that you purposely picked out yourself when you're like, I'm going to look for a fantasy book or a sci-fi book, either way?
It's a good question, because almost all of them came from my dad, because we lived in such a small town. We didn't have a library, and there was no bookstore for, forever, like whatever radius. So most of them came from him, or were like gifted to me by my parents. I'm trying to think of, oh gosh, that's an excellent question. And I honestly don't know the answer. Like, I can come up with, now that I'm older, like once I left home and I went to university and I started buying books for myself or going to the library and getting books for myself, then I was in the position where I would read like newer fantasy books and give them to my dad and be like, now I have great books for you to read and you can tell me what you think of them. But in terms of like things that I picked out for myself, it was probably when I became like a teen and started looking for like some fantasy romance, because I do like romance. And so that was not something that my dad had a lot of. Like, to be honest, there were not even a lot of girls in the fantasy books that my dad had, because they were all from like, the 70s, 80s, and they just didn't have a lot of girls in them. So that's probably what I can remember reading, a series by an author named Susan Fletcher. I think it was like a dragon series, because I've always been super into dragons, and it was like a romance fantasy, like coming of age for young girls series. And I really did like those books. But to be honest, like the majority of my fantasy reading came from within my house. Like I would just go and pick a book off the shelf and read it.
That's awesome. So did your dad have kind of the library like you have behind you there? Was that similar?
It was not as extensive, but yes, we are the house that we lived in was like kind of one of those typical like built in the 80s homes. So it had a super long hallway. And at the end of the hallway was like the bookshelf. And then like the bookshelf was stacked like, 2 or 3 rows deep with books. So they were all up there. And I was a big rereader too. Like I read a lot as a young kid, but I also read the same books a lot of times. Like I would read the ones that I liked over and over and over. So that happened a fair amount as well.
Now, when you were growing up, I remember like early on in, because I didn't realize that you hadn't been on BookTube longer than you actually have been. So I must have been watching you from pretty close from when you started. OG fan over here. But I remember you talking a lot about how you have this like insatiable competition, competitiveness inside yourself, and sometimes you have to kind of quell that a little bit. So how did that translate as you were going through high school? Like what all were you what would you compete in?
This is outside books, I'm guessing, because my first book competition, that was accelerated reader for anybody who grew up like in the 90s, of course. You would get your points for reading books. Maybe that's where it all started.
90s, of course that.
I did play a lot of sports. I ran cross country, but I was definitely not competitive because I'm not a good runner. But I did it just to like help with the other sports that I played. But I did play volleyball. And the sport that I played the most was badminton. So I was a pretty competitive badminton player. I played provincially for a long time. I did play on the national level for a couple of years. But there comes a point, like Newfoundland is really small. And then the school that I was from is even smaller. Like we had in the entire school, which was kindergarten right up to grade 12. So like all of your school years, there were 100 people in the entire school, like for all of those grades. So there were very few kids there. And the school was proportionally sized. So we had like a gym with one badminton court in it. It was, my kids are arriving home, so you're going to hear them like yelling.
You might hear my kid jumping in the back. So he's playing some video game and he likes to hop around. So
is he?
No problem.
They're like, who's home? As if like, who else is going to be here? who do you think's going to be home? But yeah, so we had a really small badminton court in a really small gym, but we were just lucky that our gym teacher was a competitive badminton player. And so when he moved to this like small town in the middle of nowhere, because he wanted to live in the woods, he coached us all in badminton. And I just really loved it, got super attached to it, and attended like a bunch of training camps. And then the more that I would go, the like more that I would play. But once you reach a certain level, so I competed nationally when I was like 13, 14. But then like the gap just becomes really wide if you're not doing the like constant training that the higher level athletes are going to do. And it was just not possible. So there was one girl from this province who moved away to Quebec to train up there. But I was also very like invested in school, and I did not want to like step away from school to play or train or do anything. Like I did not see it going in like a at a higher level, like a nationally ranked level or like an Olympic level or anything like nonsensical like that. But I was competitive for the province and probably like the collection of provinces that I lived in. So that was where a lot of it came out. And then like academically, there was obviously a lot of competitiveness there, which I, looking back, regret because I poured so much like emotion into how well I did in school. And I can honestly say now at the part of life where I'm finished all my schooling, it really didn't matter that much.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter that much.
Yeah.
But you could not have convinced 14-year-old Sarah that was true.
Yeah. And I was going to say, so did you end up like valedictorian and all that good stuff?
So yes and no. Our school, because it was so tiny, it was a vote for valedictorian. And you can imagine that as like a super nerdy fantasy reader who was way too competitive, I was not very popular. Like even amongst like
we can't let her win
in my class. So I was actually not the valedictorian, but if you had gone by like academic standing, then I would have been. But no, it was by popular vote. Oh, dear.
You're like, that still burns me. Oh
It does
man.
not, but it did at the time. Looking back now, I'm like, okay, Sarah, it doesn't really matter. But at the time, I was not happy about it.
Yeah, that one that's a thing like for people who are competitive, especially when you're in like high school or whatever, and if you're competitive at anything, a lot of that you look back on and you're like, man, like that didn't really matter. Like
Right?
that
It
didn't really
really
matter at
didn't. It
all.
really
You know,
didn't.
why did I kill myself to try and you know have perfect attendance or
Yes.
whatever? It's like nobody cares. Like
No, it matters
But-
0% now. So this is what I am trying really hard. My husband is very relaxed. Like he does not have any of this. Like he is the opposite in every way, which is really good. So I had hoped that our children might end up somewhere in the middle. But no,
yeah.
I like they got all that from me, and I've been trying really hard to be like, guys, it's okay. You don't have to be. But no, they are intensely competitive, and because they're so close in age, they're only 13 months apart. They're also really competitive with each other. So it and like over the most nonsensical things, like things that you don't need to compete over. I'm like, guys,
Yeah.
it's okay.
Yeah. I w- and I am that way like today. It's like I just joined like Andrew's readathon and
Mhm.
I just started to kind of get on Discord more. And then he's like, "Oh, we're doing our first ever." And I'm like, "You know what? I haven't ever done one for anybody." I was like, "So I'll jump in." And then like when they start doing like, "All right, so you can do this and this 8." And I'm like, "Now I'm reading 8 books because I have to."
Because
And I
you need
have to
to,
hit all
right?
the extra points. And I'm like, I'm the most competitive person you'll ever meet. And sometimes I purposely kind of stay away from stuff because I know I'm like, we gotta win. You know.
Absolutely. This is how I came onto BookTube. I don't know if I'm sure I've talked about this before, but when I joined a readathon on Alan's Discord, like before I had my own channel, and this is exactly what happened is I became a monster. Like there was no team spirit. It was just cutthroat. Like we have to win. I read The Stand in 2 days. 2 days. It was December 30th. I read it on December 30th and 31st. And
Oh
I was
my
like,
god.
I am finishing this book. And so like the last 2 days of my Christmas vacation were just me reading The Stand, being like, nobody talk.
Leave me alone.
I need
Leave
these
me alone.
right.
You're
Oh
like, I
god.
have 2 chapters. Can you go away?
Right. Mom, look at my Christmas gift. No.
I
It
love
wasn't
it.
that bad, but it was probably too intense.
Like I'm trying to stamp down the competitiveness because like in school we played volleyball and it didn't matter who was on my team because I'd be the one serving it, then running past everybody to spike the ball.
Get
Yeah.
out of my
And they're
way.
like, Joe, you gotta let someone else they had to make a rule, like someone else had to touch it before I could retouch the ball. And I'm just like, do you want to win? What do you want to do here? Like, so I'm trying not to be like that person, like, how many books do you got? Come on, you can do it. Like,
Right? It's hard. It's hard. I have definitely mellowed with age, but it took a long time. It took time to get there.
So, did that kind of translate into college? Because I'm trying to remember. Are you a psychologist, psychiatrist, or
Psychiatrist. So I did
psychiatrist?
I did go through med school. So it definitely did. And like I went to a small university too. In Newfoundland, there's one university and has two campuses. So there's a campus in St. John's, which is the capital city.
Yeah,
And
that's
then
the
there's
only
like
one.
then there's a smaller like artsy campus on the west coast of the island, which is where I'm from. And that
Okay.
probably has like I don't know, Andrew would know if I asked him, but like maybe 5,000 students. Like it's a tiny university.
Yeah.
And they had this bad habit. I don't know if they do it at other universities too. They used to post like standings after exams on the door of the classroom.
Ooh.
So like you would walk up and like it wouldn't be your name, but it would be your student number. And it would be like in the row, like how you did in the
Dun, dun,
class. I'm like,
dun.
okay, this is just I was definitely competitive at that time. And it's funny, actually, I did not plan to go to med school. I thought I was going to go into academia, and I was doing an arts degree. I did an arts degree, but I took organic chemistry as an elective. which is a hilarious elective, but I wanted to. Everybody said it was hard, so I was like, okay, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do well in it because, again, like just not good thoughts. But I took it, and the professor of the organic chemistry class was like, "Are you applying for med school?" And I was like, "Well, I hadn't really planned on." He was like, "Well, why don't you just write the MCAT and see?" And I was like, "Okay, well, I'll write it and see." And so I wrote it, and I did well enough on it to apply. So when I was applying for like other programs at the end of my undergrad, I also applied for med school at the same time. And I didn't really know if I would get in because I did, like I said, an arts degree. Like I did a French degree. I did not have like a ton of experience. I didn't volunteer at like hospitals, but I did volunteer a lot, and I did do a lot of different, like I was involved in a lot of different things. And it just so happens that MUN, which is the university in Newfoundland, also has like a pretty artsy med school. Like their whole university is very it's not super focused on like research and science. It's more like about the humanities, because I think in Newfoundland, because it's a small province and they're really underserviced in terms of physicians, they want to pull people in who like the lifestyle here, like people who they think are probably going to stay in Newfoundland, who can live rurally, who are into more of that like patient focused, patient centered care. Like they're not looking for and don't expect to attract the kinds of med students who want to do like, groundbreaking research, because there's just not the facilities here for it. They want people who are more like into patient care. So that was how it ended up happening. I am going to read it, Evie, before the end of the year.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Oh man, but so does that give you a different perspective when you're reading, like when you're reading characters and stuff? Are you breaking them down a lot while you're reading, or do you kind of like turn off your critical brain, when you're reading a book?
It depends on what I'm reading and why I'm reading it and what I've heard about it before. So this is one of the things, and poor Fonda Lee, I'm going to pick on her again in this stream, but I did end up really liking Jade Legacy. So I feel like I can be,
I'm starting that this month. So the only thing I've read by her is Untethered Sky.
But one of the only things that really bothers me is when people are so psychologically aware. Because I meet a lot of people, and almost none of us are aware of why we do the things that we do. Like as authors, we create, or they create these characters. And so they have to think, like you have to think as an author, like what are my characters' motivations? Why do they do the things they do? How did they end up like this? If they're going to behave like this or express themselves in this way, what is the driving force behind that? And a good author, which I think Fonda Lee is someone who thinks through their characters and has all those motivations, knows the answers to those questions. But there are some people, and this is something that really got to me in Jade, what's the first one called? Jade City? When people are thinking about what they're doing and they're providing their own motivation.
Yeah, like they're breaking themselves down.
Why they're doing these things. Yes, exactly. I'm like, people don't think like that. That's why everyone's anxious and depressed, because we don't understand why we do.
Yeah, like Jim Butcher was, probably my biggest influence, him and Sapkowski. So like when I write, my characters are kind of the Harry Dresden type where they really don't know themselves. They're like, they're like, man, I'm just not, I'm not there. I'm not good enough. And like, people are like, what are you talking about? Like, I like those type of characters who are kind of self-deprecating and, like you said, they don't know why they're doing everything they're doing. They're not having this full breakdown of themselves in their head. But yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Are like pretty psychologically aware. Like if you're someone who has gone through therapy or someone who is just astute in that way, because there definitely are people who have that level of self-awareness. It's usually not in the moment. Like usually, and then afterward you'd be like, oh, this is where my headspace was, and this is what was happening. But it's not like a procedural show where you're like, oh, I looked over in the side and this sparked a memory of this thing and this happened, and like that's just not the way that people think.
I mean, that's 100%. I'm right there with you. And another thing that maybe you, of all the booktubers I know, are into animal companions more than anybody else. Like I love me I say whenever you make a list of animal companions, Oi is always the right answer.
Yes.
Oi is always the right answer. And if it's not Oi, then it has to be mouse. So like,
Mouse is also great.
but so what draws you to animal companions or animal characters in
I
general?
love animals. So for most of my life, I thought I was going to be a veterinarian. So that was, I guess, my dream was to be a field zoologist, like off in the the
That would be
bush,
awesome. Yeah.
studying animals in real time. But I did not feel that was going to be a super attainable career. So I was like, okay, well, I'll be a veterinarian. And it was just too sad. And I like sick people are also sad, but I think just the lack of being able to communicate effectively with an animal and like understand what's happening, like it was going to be too hard. And I didn't think that it would make me happy in the end. Derry is right. Night Eyes is also always the right answer. But
what is this from?
This is from Realm of the Elderlings.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Robin Hobb is the next. Like this month, I'm doing a lot of books, obviously, but so I'm starting Jade City, which everybody loves, and then it seems like, and then I'm starting my first Ursula K. Le Guin book, which Ursi. So I'm gonna get there. I'm gonna get to Robin Hobb. She's on the list.
Derry's comments are, you don't sound argumentative today, Derry. Alan, what are you sad about? Like, I haven't even done anything. You just got here. I haven't done anything yet. We'll let Alan answer if he's still there. But I think so. I love animals, so that translates well into animal companions. I also like kids' books. Like, I didn't ever really grow out of enjoying kids' books. I went through a period of time where I read a lot of YA fiction, which is not something that I still really like, but I love like middle grade and children's books. I think that they are super whimsical. I really like those imaginative kind of stories. And there's a lot of animals in kids' books. So I like that. The Phantom Tollbooth is top tier. I didn't read, sorry to go off on a tangent, JR, but I didn't read The Phantom Tollbooth because I don't know if anybody spends a lot of time on Goodreads, but Patrick Rothfuss wrote a really like scathing review of The Phantom Tollbooth when he read it to his child. And I really like Patrick Rothfuss's reviews, and a lot of the books that he has reviewed that I had not heard of, I then read and really liked them. And I was like, oh, awesome. So when I read his review of The Phantom Tollbooth, I was like, well, that's clearly not like a high priority.
Yeah.
And then I don't remember, was this year or last year? I think it was last year. It came up as an available audiobook at the library. I was doing like a painting and I needed something to listen to. And I was like, okay, well, I'll just listen to The Phantom Tollbooth. It's on a bunch of like lists of classics and I like ticking off those lists. So I guess I'll read it. And I listened to it and it was so good. It was so fun. I gave it to Juliet and she listened to it like all in one day and she loved it. So Patrick Rothfuss's review is too mean, in my opinion. It is. He should, reconsider his thoughts about The Phantom Tollbooth.
Oh my gosh. I'm glad that Alan is here because I just started doing a new series where I talk about like crazy things from history that seem like they're fantasy. Mm-hmm. And my first one just for Alan was the Sea Peoples. And I know he hates the Bronze Age collapse. So I was like, that one's just for you, Alan.
Dedicated to Alan.
Oh my gosh. But I forgot. I was watching one of your videos recently, and I forgot that you talked about like you were doing some writing. So how do you write? I know you do a journal. Have you attempted to write a novel, or is that just something you just do for fun to mess around?
So a lot of it's for fun. I write and have always written for a long time a lot of fan fiction. So I have been a big fan fiction writer. I hate watching it, which I find really fun. I like romance, like I said before, and it just gives you like characters that you already like. And I personally think that the fan fiction community is really fun and really welcoming. You get like instantaneous feedback. Everybody's excited when someone's writing something. And so it becomes like a group of friends. And so when I started writing fan fiction, like years and years ago, I had, I was an adult, but like it was a long time ago. I've been an adult for a long time, sadly. But I have a friend that I met through that, and we've been friends for years, like years and years and years and years. So it's nice because people who write and read fan fiction are usually very enthusiastic, and
Yeah.
so they're fun people to be friends with. So I do write a lot of fan fiction, and I take breaks. Like it goes through like time. Like sometimes I do it a lot, sometimes I don't do it a lot. But I have written non-fan fiction things, never fantasy. That's not true. I think I did like a YA fantasy type thing for NaNoWriMo at one point. But usually not fantasy because it feels like work. Number one, am not a very visual person. Andrew and I just had this conversation actually driving home from St. John's a few weekends ago. And he said something about picturing something in his head. And I was like, I've never pictured something in my head in my life. Like he was like, but what if I say this? Like what pops in your head? I'm like, nothing, the word. Like I do not get any visual like feedback in my brain ever. Like I don't. So like when I'm reading a book, he's like, well, when you're reading a fantasy book, do you like picture the landscape or the characters? I'm like, no, I don't. Like unless it's one of those cliche, like she looked in the mirror and surveyed her long brown hair and her bright blue eyes. And like, then I'm like, okay, well, this must be kind of what this person looks like. But it just doesn't happen. And so much of fantasy is that I don't think I would do a very good job writing a fantasy novel. I would and have like had fun putting together like a romance novel, like a rom-com, something like that. But never fantasy. And even if I feel like I have a cool idea sometimes, I don't think that I could do it justice, like bringing it to life in that way. So I'm not going to say like never, but I don't think it would happen for fantasy.
Yeah. Because I think I remember watching you talk about this, and then I want to say Joanna did a video about this, about people not being able to see. And so I wonder, where does that lean you? So does that push you to more character-driven stuff, or do you like stories where they paint a picture, like where they write everything out for you?
No, I don't care for it. Like I got 100 pages into The Wheel of Time. I was like, this is too much. I cannot handle it. There are too many details and I don't care about any of them. This is not something that I'm going to continue with. So I don't need it to be. I don't mind it, clearly. Like I love Lord of the Rings, and J.R.R. Tolkien is very descriptive. And it works for me somehow in that, probably because it's, 3 books and not 15 or 16 or whatever.
Yeah.
But it is not a necessity. Like that kind of world building is not something that I care about. It's not always bad. Like I don't necessarily dislike it. I probably do find myself like skim reading during those parts because they just don't mean anything to me. Like I cannot visualize it. And in books, like for example, Alan and I read the Risen Kingdoms series, and those books, like some of them take place in like air balloons or like airships or whatever. And just orienting myself in space is really difficult. I'm also very, very bad with directions in real life. Like to the point that I think some people believe that it is intentional. So when I went to university, it took me months to figure out how to navigate the university. I could memorize like doorways. So if I took the same route all the time, I'm like, okay, that's number 406. And now I have to get to number whatever. So I have a good memory, but my visual spatial skills are zero. They are so negligible that it is.
Don't drop me in the woods. I'll never make my way out of here.
Never. I literally don't drop me in the middle of the city that I like spent 10 years living in, because I would never find my way out. When Andrew and I went on our first date, we went for a walk, and we were 2 streets away from the university. And I was like, where are we? He was like, Sarah, we go to university here. Like Mun is right there. Like you can see the building from over that house. And I was like, interesting. Like if you had left me here on the street, I wouldn't have been able to find my way home. Like
you're like, I gotta find the landmarks. I'll just go in a straight line.
Oh, it's the worst. Like seeing a detour sign is my worst nightmare. Like if I was driving, even in St. John's where I lived for 10 plus years, like 13, 14 years, if I was taking like my regular route somewhere and there was a detour sign, I would panic because I'd be like, I have no idea where this is going to bring me. St. John's also, for anyone who has never traveled to Newfoundland, which is probably everybody, it is a city made of one-way streets. It's the weirdest.
Oh, God, like Cincinnati here. Oh.
Right? It's terrible because Newfoundland at first was just a bunch of like fishing settlements. So like all of these towns grew up just around the water. There. So like things started at the water and then they just make this weird like spiral out into like these towns, but nothing is planned. And it's just a series of one-way streets and it is terrible. It is absolutely terrible. Visit Newfoundland is really nice, but have a GPS because you need it.
So I know you were really like when you first got I don't know if you had read it right before you got on BookTube or right at the beginning, but you were super big into First Law, right?
Yes, I love the First Law. So First Law was my first BookTube recommendation. So one of the earliest channels that I watched was Mike's channel, and he talked a lot about the First Law. And so one of the reasons that I wanted to come onto BookTube was to read more modern fantasy because I had read a lot of classic fantasy, and then I had read after that I had read a lot of like literary fiction and those kinds of things. And I had taken a break from fantasy and I wanted to read like what was popular in modern fantasy. And so the First Law was the first book that I picked up. And it was really funny because I picked up the first one. I bought I think I bought the whole trilogy at once and I picked up the first one. And when I read the first one, I was like, well, this just feels like classic fantasy. Like it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot different here, but it does diverge obviously. And there are different things. And like he subverts like really common tropes and, it does.
Everyone's morally gray in his world.
Exactly. But in the beginning, like at the beginning of the Blade itself, I was like, this doesn't feel that different from the things that I had read. But I love the First Law. I started it a few years ago. I only finished it. Was it this year or last year? I don't know. Like the time is all. I think this year, at the very beginning of this year, is when I finished the Age of Madness.
So where did you go after the First Law trilogy? Because I've only done the First Law trilogy, so I'm been kind of waiting, getting some other series in, some other trilogies in, but I do want to go back. So I'm like, where do I go? What's like the best option?
I did them in order. So I just did the trilogy, then I did all of the standalones, then I did the short stories, and then the Age of Madness.
What was the first standalone that you did?
The first standalone, Best Served Cold.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard a lot of people say that that's a good place to go, and I'm just like, all right. Yeah, I've heard nothing but good things.
It is really fun. I, like in many things, have the unpopular opinion. It's my least favorite of the standalones, but I still like it. I just really love the other two. And the standalone that most people dislike is the Western. And that's the one that I like the most. It is probably like my second favorite First Law book. And I love it.
So, okay. And that was like kind of leads into another question I wanted to ask you. So I know you're super big into Westerns, at least Western movies. Mm-hmm. So what is your favorite Western?
Like movie?
Yeah.
The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, probably. Tombstone, I really like. I really love Tombstone. The scenes with Doc and like just the friendship, and I don't know. I know it's probably like I don't really know that much about like critical acclaim for movies. I don't know what's popular, what people think is good or not good, but I really love Tombstone.
Yeah, I grew up like my dad was older when he had us, so he was big, like he was old enough to know like when Clint Eastwood started doing these movies. So we watched all the Westerns, John Wayne, True Grit, Fistful of Dollars, all that stuff. So I mean, I love Westerns, and that's why my second book I wrote a fantasy Western, because I was like I don't see too many outside of the Gunslinger, like,
right.
They give you that kind of feel.
Have you watched Shane?
Shane, no, that's one of the classics I have not watched. I know like everyone is like, for movies, Shane is like one of the best all time, and then books, I haven't read Lonesome Dove yet. So
I also have not read Lonesome Dove. But if you read Shane, or if you have seen Shane, when you read the Western of the First Law books, you're like, like definitely there are some nods, and like a couple of really big nods to it in there. So
yeah, I think that's the reason why I liked the Dark Tower so much, because like it kind of kept that Western theme kind of throughout, and especially like Wolves of the Kala. I loved Wolves of the Kala.
I think like Wolves of the Kala too. I know, again, it's where everything starts to get wonky. So some people are like, I don't know how I feel about Wolves of the Kala, but I think Wolves of the Kala is fun.
So what is your favorite, like, or if you can't narrow it down, like what are your top like 3 to 5 movies? Like what do you look for? You're like, oh, like this will be a great movie just to put on.
So I will preface this. Sorry, my jaw just cracked. It was probably loud. I will preface this by saying I watch almost no movies. Like I watch almost no movies or TV. I watch very little TV, and anybody who's in my Discord will attest to the fact. Like I might watch a TV show a year. That is like, if I am lucky. I've watched more TV this year than I typically do. Was this year the Last of Us year? It came out this year, right?
Yeah, the beginning of the year.
At
Yeah,
the
I believe
beginning of the
so.
year. So I did watch that. But I do have some movies that I like. So my movie taste is like all over the place, probably. So Lord of the Rings, obviously, is one of my favorite movies of all
Awesome.
time. So that would be top. Pride and Prejudice. I apologize to Evie because she's probably going to hate this answer, but I like the 2005 Pride and Prejudice, like the newer one with Keira Knightley. I just think that is so beautiful. I love the music. I really love it. The Princess Bride is probably my favorite movie of all time, which is a fantasy movie, I guess, as well. What other movies do I really love? The Matrix, like the original Matrix movie, the
Oh
first
yeah.
one, is one of my favorite movies. And Evie loves the 2005 one. Good. And other favorite, probably Fern Gully, the animated movie.
I'll bring that up and people will be like, what are you talking about? I'm just like, you don't know Fern Gully? Who are you people?
Right.
You
Well, there's
know,
a
like,
bat in it. So, I mean, it already gets a lot of
yeah,
points from me because I really like bats. So that is probably why I love Fern Gully so much. I love Batty, but
yeah.
I think Fern Gully is probably my favorite animated movie.
Yeah, Fern Gully is definitely up there. And it's like I remember I don't know when it came out, but I remember being really young when I watched it and thinking it's like this is kind of a dark movie. You know, like
Yes,
yeah,
Texas.
it's
So
like,
dark.
you know, but so what have you I know you said I know you've went on some vacations and stuff. So what have you been reading since you've been, away for a little while?
The series of the summer for me, this is fun because I haven't talked about any books all summer. Everything is going to be new right now. The series of the summer for me has been the Locked Tomb series by Tamsin Muir, the one that starts with Gideon the Ninth.
Oh,
I
okay.
did right before I left booktube. I did not everyone, but people in my Discord picked books for me to read, which was really fun. And I want to do it again, probably in the new year for people who had not picked any this time. But one of my friends in Discord picked Gideon the Ninth and said that she thought I would like it. And I loved it so much. I know it's a really divisive book on BookTube. Some people love it, some people hate it. Some people really like the first one, then go into the second one. This is what happened to Petrick, I think, is he read Gideon the Ninth and then read the second one, which is called Harrow the Ninth, and was like, this is terrible. I'm DNFing this entire series now. And it's super weird. The beginning of the second book is told in the second person. So it's definitely jarring, but I love it so much. I am obsessed with it. It has so many of the things that I personally like. It is going to be a series that is not for everybody, and one that I think will be really hard to make a blanket recommendation for because it's so weird. It's about necromancers. There's mystery. The first one is kind of like a murder mystery story. The second one is this weird like exploration of grief and trauma, and I was eating it up. It was so well done. And now the third one is also way out there. Like I can't talk about anything that happens in the third one because the whole series is so weird and full of spoilers. But the third book, when it begins, you're like, okay, well, it definitely can't be any weirder than the second one is. And then you like read the first chapter, like, holy crap, this is even weirder than the second one was. So I am loving it in like a very strange, like it has a super like intense relationship at the core. It was really, really good. You did not pick my least favorite book, Colton. Poor Penny. And this is my least favorite book of the ones that I read for the like Discord pick your TBR thing was Jude the Obscure, which is a classic by Thomas Hardy. And Penny also hated it. Like we were reading and we were like, we're so glad that we are reading this together because I don't know if we could make it alone. It was, oh, what a struggle.
Oh my gosh, that is great. And one of the like, and as I was kind of following your journey, we really got to see that you are the best daughter ever, because you gave your dad the Dresden Files.
Yes, for many reasons, that is one of them.
Yeah. And when I seen that, and you're like, I'm getting my dad into the Dresden Files, I'm like, yes, like that. And I've said this a bunch of times. Your videos on changes and on Skin Game, probably my two, and also Battlegrounds, but like those, like my favorite videos of all time on BookTube. Just the best.
Oh, thank you. You like to see me cry, I guess. Is where you're going with this.
Guilty. I would listen to, like, your emotions on it were so great. Like, because it's real. Like, you can tell, like, you're really invested in the characters, and just like
so emotional.
And it's a bit like, and Jim has even said this in his interviews. He goes, yeah, I kind of like writing stuff I know is going to hurt you. Like, well,
he enjoys it.
Well, like, you're like, everyone's telling me I gotta like read this live, or I've got to vlog it, and I'm just sitting here like, oh yes, like
this is gonna be good. It was Gary and Colton totally being like, you need to vlog this, you need to record. And people, so in the beginning it was just like, you just have to record your reaction to the first like couple of pages, like the first few paragraphs. And so I did, and I read the first few paragraphs, and I was like, well, I'm pretty sure actually I was like, well, fuck. Like, it was just what is happening? But it was really fun. I am so excited. I do not care. Like, I could retire from BookTube tomorrow, but when the newest Dresden Files book comes out, I'm vlogging it. I don't even care. Like, if he doesn't write it for 10 years, I'll be back, 45-year-old Sarah vlogging the Dresden Files. It's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, and yeah, like I started, that was like, Dresden was like the thing I kind of started BookTube off on. And like when he dropped The Law, I was like, all right, we're cutting this out of order. I'm going to do this in a one day and have it out. Like, I just, yeah. Mm-hmm. And I thought, like, when you did, I knew Changes was going to be great, because Changes is always those things. And I came in, I want to say right after Ghost Story was published is when I started, or right around that time. So I had the, but everyone says, oh, changes. And you're thinking to yourself, you're like, okay, people, we get it. It's it's a good book. Like, you don't oversell me. And then you get there and you're like, why didn't I listen?
It's true.
But then even more so in Skin Game, when, like, I'm not going to do any spoilers here because it's way down the rabbit hole here, but like one of the greatest fantasy characters of all time, you're like, I would just remember you like, you better not. I remember you saying, you better not, like, into the camera.
I like, could not.
You better not.
It was because Changes had proven to me that he would do bad things. That he could do things to hurt you. And so when I was reading Skin Game, and that part of reading that book will be in my mind forever. The amount of anxiety that I felt when I read that chapter, trying to figure out what was going to happen and what he was going to do with this person. And I couldn't handle it. I was vibrating. Like, I was crying before it happened because I was trying to prepare myself for how I would feel if it did happen. And I just, like, the tears had already begun before anything even went down. I was that high, which is what I love about this series. Like, I know there are a lot of people who don't like Dresden, which is fine. Like, it is definitely not going to be a series for everyone, but you can't read a series like that and become that attached to the characters without it becoming an all-time favorite. Like, Dresden will definitely be in my top 10 series. I don't care about the flaws. There are definitely things about it that I wish were different, but I care so much. Like, things happening to them hurt me, which is what I like. I want to feel like that.
Yeah, exactly. and that's the best part for me is like that's why I love like character driven stories. It's just like you, especially if you've been listening to them for years, or like Dresden, it's like 17 books total with the side stories and everything.
Absolutely.
Like he's so good. And you know, there have been book series where I've read like 3,000 pages and I'm just like, I don't care. I don't care about any of these characters in this series. Like if you could kill anybody you want, and I would just be like, oh well, that kind of sucks. And Jim has like in one of his early book 5 kills off a character, and it's like the character was in it for like 400 pages, and I'm sitting there like I'm like devastated. I'm like, this character has only been on the page for 400 pages, and already I'm like, I'm over here like, man, there's some dust in my eye. Like, what is going on here? Like, why did you do this? You know,
Absolutely.
you know, that's why I think like, you know, if you, as long as you can provide me with average prose, but be like a great character storyteller. That's another thing, like Jim Butcher and like Stephen King, like they do great characters. And like I remember, I think you were on with Mike, and he asked you about your favorite Dark Tower character, and you said Roland, and I'm like yes, like Roland is a great character. Like I like sometimes when you do those lists, you're kind of like, well, do I want to put the main character as number one?
The main character, yeah.
But he is so good, and I think that's why we kind of needed that backstory. Yes, I am. You know what? I will read Hob. Okay, you guys got me. In October, I'm gonna have a lot less reading in October, but Hob will be one of them. Okay.
I also promised Erie that I will finish Live Ship before 2023 ends, even if it has to be like last year with Mistborn, where I'm reading it in the last like week of the year. It will happen, but I am not. This year is not ending without Live Ship being completed.
Oh gosh.
I need to promise that.
Yeah. Well, and I just you're writing that down. You're gonna hold me to it. Okay, so at least one Hob book will be on the TBR in October. But so I know you. Hold on 1 second.
Yep, sure.
I think my hellhound was trying to get into my room. Yeah, he's like a 90-pound like bull in the china shop, so he would have just been jumping all over the place.
Cute.
Oh my gosh. But so what are your favorite animal companions? I know we talked about Oi, but like which ones do you like the best? Because I know you've had several lists out there.
I do. So Oi is at the top of my list. I could not rank them right now because it would take time for me to like actually think about it. But Oi is definitely up there. Mouse is definitely up there. Night Eyes is definitely up there. Like those are 3 that are easy. Night Eyes being a wolf character from the Realm of the Elderlings. I love from his Dark Materials in that series. Everybody has a demon, which is kind of like a corporeal manifestation of their soul almost. And
starting that this month too.
Have you not read?
I'm reading the Golden Compass this month for the readathon.
Nice, awesome. So I do love Pan, the Lyra's animal companion, I guess we'll call him, from that series. I love if Wolf from The Talisman counts as an animal companion. I don't know if he does because he's a werewolf, but he is at least partially animal. Then I also really love Wolf from the Talisman. What other animal companions do I really love? Like off the top of my head, there is the book I was talking about earlier. Actually, it's called Flight of the Dragonkin by Susan Fletcher. The main character in that book has a falcon that is her companion, which was one of my like early animal companions. And now whenever I play D&D, I always force people to give me an animal companion. It's usually, and it's sometimes a falcon. My husband did a campaign for us when, for me and a friend of ours, there was the 3 of us. when we lived in St. John's, and I spent so much of the first like several sessions trying to find myself an animal companion and like doing all these things to be like, and then an animal comes and you'd be like, no, it doesn't look Andrew. All I want is an animal. Like, please.
Yeah, please. Why do you do this?
You need to help me. Who else are my favorite animal companions? I'm sure I had a list of this written at some point to do a video of it. And as soon as I walk away, I'll be like, oh yes, there are 14 of them now on my mind. There are animal characters that I really love too, that are not companions, but are characters on their own, like Reepicheep from the Chronicles of Narnia, which is a series that I have almost never talked about on BookTube, but was an early series that I liked. I love Reepicheep. I love from Watership Down, there are a bunch of, I love Hazel, I love Bigwig. What other animals and animal companions do I like? I'm trying to think of like dragons, because I love dragons and I have read like all of the dragon books that I could possibly find, but there's no like one dragon character that like sticks out of my mind where I'm like, yes, I love that dragon. It's the best dragon of all the dragons. So maybe I need to like track down a favorite dragon. But if there is an animal in a book, I'm already in love with it. Like it could be a mean animal, it could be a nice animal. I guarantee you, I already love it. Like it's been on the page, it's been there for 2 pages. That's it.
So
yes, that's true. That is true, Evie. I have only read The Bear and the Nightingale, and I'm not sure how I'm supposed to pronounce it. Like, is it Solove? But it's a horse from the Bear and the Nightingale, and also a great character.
have you read the Witcher series?
I haven't.
Oh gosh, there's some pretty cool like once you go into like the Fey realm, you get to see some pretty cool stuff like unicorns and all that stuff if you played. So do you play video games at all?
I don't, because of the visual part. So I'm not good at like figuring out where to go. I do watch Andrew play video games sometimes, but I know that I would get really frustrated. Like I really only play side scroll games. Like I like video games, like really old video games, like Mario. And my favorite video game is this random Nintendo video game called Bubble Bobble, where you're a little dragon. You have to like capture your enemies in bubbles and then pop them.
Oh my god.
The music is so addictive. Like, it gets in your mind. And like Andrew was just humming it the other day. I was like, were you playing Bubble Bubble? He's like, no, it's just been there forever.
Yeah, like anytime I like bust out the old system or whatever, the music like stays with you for like 2 or 3 days. You're just like, and I'm like, oh my gosh, no.
Yeah, but I wish I liked video games more, because they seem like video games now. I just watched Andrew play the new Final Fantasy one like last month or whatever. They're basically like a movie and a book all in one. Like there's so much happening. There's so many scenes. You're getting such a story. Like I think he was actually a little bit irritated because I liked it so much. And then I was like, you can't play it unless I'm there. And I go to bed really early and Andrew goes to bed really late. So he'd be up at night being like, oh, now I want to play Final Fantasy, but I can't because Sarah's not here.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's how my wife does. Like she'll play like Halo, Call of Duty, stuff like that. But like she doesn't play like a lot of story stuff. But like when I played Dying Light, she was like, "You can't play this game unless I'm here." And like she was watching it like it was a television show, you know.
Right?
Like,
they're so good now.
But so I saw, like, did you recently, or was it? I don't know if it's an older picture. Finish the Mistborn trilogy. How long ago was that?
That was last year. So I finished at the end of last year. It was my. Like this year, I need to finish the live ship series. Last year, I needed to finish Mistborn. I was like putting it off, procrastinating it for so long. And then finally December came, and December was like creeping up. And I think it was like after Christmas, I was like, okay, I'm reading it. What's the last one called?
Hero of Ages.
Hero of Ages. There we go. The first one is called The Final Empire, right?
Yeah.
So I was reading Hero of Ages and I need to finish it. And so I did. And now it's done. Thank God.
It was a huge book. I was just like, oh my gosh. Because I just finished it a couple days ago. I haven't even done a review or anything on it. But was that your first Sanderson?
No, so I my first book by Brandon Sanderson was, I believe, the first book in his Reckoner series called Steelheart, which is like one of his like YA series.
Oh,
And the
okay.
only reason I read it, it's not the same, Derry. It's not the same. I don't feel the same about Live Ships as I do about Mistborn. I want to read the Live Ships. I just mean it was the one that I needed to finish last year. But when I was younger, when I was in med school, my friend Allison, who is equally nerdy, went to Comic-Con, like San Diego Comic-Con.
Oh,
Yeah, it
wow.
was super. We were super excited about it. It was like getting the tickets was like an experience. And anyway, we were
How
really
long
pumped
did that
that we
trip
got
take
tickets.
you?
Pardon?
How long did that trip take? That's going to be like the longest North American thing you can do
Oh yeah, it
almost.
was super, super long. It was like an entire day of traveling. It was very tiring, but it was worth it. It was so much fun. But Brandon Sanderson was going to be there. So one of the main things that I wanted to do was all the book stuff. She's really into TV. I'm really into books. So we had very different things that we wanted to do. So my like main goal at Comic-Con was to meet Patrick Rothfuss, which I did get to do.
Oh, nice.
And this was back when like the
When
books
he
had
was still writing?
right, exactly. So The Wise Man's Fear came out in 2011 and we went in 2012. So it hadn't been that long since a book came out. And then I was looking at the list of authors and I hadn't read anything by Brandon Sanderson. I was like, okay, well, Brandon Sanderson is going to be there. I should read something. And at that time I had read like a fair amount of YA. Superhero stuff was huge because it was 2012. It was the year of like the first Avengers movie.
Yeah.
The MCU was still really new. And so I was like, oh, well, he has a superhero book. I'll read that. So I read that, did not continue on with that series because I didn't really like that book that much. I also, and then after that, I read Warbreaker. That was one of my first booktube books because I was looking, like I was watching standalone books to read, and it was probably an Elliot Brooks video recommendation, I would assume, because she really likes Warbreaker and she used to recommend it a lot, like when I first started watching her channel. So I picked up Warbreaker, and I actually really liked that one.
So that's a standalone?
That is a standalone-ish. Like it's still part of the Cosmere, I think.
Yeah.
So there are connections probably that I didn't get, but you can read it as a standalone. And then after that, I read Mistborn. And I had tried to read Mistborn several times. I actually bought it for my dad. And he had read the trilogy. And so I tried to pick it up and I read the first like couple of chapters. I'm going to say like 2 or 3 times. And I just wasn't into it. And then once I got on BookTube, everybody loved him so much.
Yeah.
And everybody loves that series so much. I was like, okay, well, I gotta do it.
You gotta get in there.
Right? I have to do it. And it was a painful process. And Kyle makes fun of me because he's like, you always talk about how painful it was to read Mistborn, but you gave them all like 4 stars, or I think I gave one of them 3.5 stars. And they're not bad. Like there are things about them that are really enjoyable, but it is just not a book that was easy for me to read. I didn't ever feel like I was totally pulled in. Like it always felt like a task. Like I have to pick this book up now and I have to read it and I have to make it through X number of chapters. I don't like feeling like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the one thing I will say. Like people talk about, like, oh, like have your tastes changed or have your habits changed since being on BookTube? And it's like, yeah, absolutely, they have. It's like you want to kind of be a part of the conversation. You know, when people are like, oh, I've read all these books. I'm like, I haven't read like Hobb, like haven't read a single thing by Hobb. You know, and it's like I really want to get, but you know. There's so many books, like
right. You want to talk to people about them, and you want to. I am the opposite of a hipster. Like if everybody loves something, I want to read it, and that has led me to some bad places because there are books that I have read that I'm like, oh, I really wish that I'd never read that. But if it's really popular, I want to read it because I want to know why people like it. I want to be able to talk about it. And if they say, have you read this? I want to be able to say, yeah, of course I have. So I want to be able to say that. So I really wanted to read something. And I am still going to read Stormlight. I don't think that Brandon Sanderson's style of writing is ever going to be my favorite, but there are things about his storytelling that I do like. He does have really cool endings. Seeing the pieces of his story fall together is fun. Like, it is cool to see how he has plotted everything out and he pulls all the strings together and it all falls into place. Like, that's fun and enjoyable. It's just, I don't think that I would be very surprised if any of his books ended up as like one of my favorite books or favorite series, even Stormlight. Like, I'm not going in expecting that to be a favorite series of all time for me.
Yeah. Like, because I hadn't read anything by him until it was like right around the time that the article came out, right? And I was like, I just don't like the way that the guy was talking. Like, it's so weird. Like, I'm here defending Brandon Sanderson, having not read a single thing he's done. I've watched a lot of his writing tutorials and his classes on YouTube, and I'm just like, there's no way this guy is there's no way he's a bad writer. This is like first off, like, just listening to him talk, knowing how smart he is, and then secondly, like, how popular he is. I'm just like, and this, like, sometimes an unpopular opinion that I have is that if something is mega popular, it's not bad. Like, it can definitely not, like, marketing can push a book that's just good to the stratosphere, but it's like, you're not gonna, no matter how much you market, you're not gonna get like a crappy book to be one of the most popular books in the world. Like, eventually people will figure you out after a little bit,
or
but
it has to fill a need, like, whether it's like what someone will qualify as like good or bad. Like, it has to fill something for someone. Like, there has to be something about it, because you could, like, people will definitely make the Twilight argument. They're like, okay, well, Twilight became like this huge giant sensation. It basically fueled like an entire industry of paranormal YA romance. And even if you don't think it's good in terms of writing or story or originality or whatever, it was the kind of story. It filled a very like specific need for a very large group of people. So there's always going to be something. I agree. Like, for something to reach that, to attain that level of popularity, there's got to be something about it.
Yeah, I think I'm very similar to the way you think about that, because like I made a poll, I don't know, 6-7 months ago, and I did it over like a week, and I was like, and you can only, because on the community tab you can only do like 4 at a time. So I did like I put like 4 authors up, who's the most overrated, and at the end of the whole thing it was Sarah J. Maas. Like, she won the championship. So and I was like, you know what, because you picked her, I'm gonna read a book by her just to see. And I believe I chose wrong, because I was like, okay, well, her newest series is called like Crescent City or something like that. And I thought, well, she's only got 2 of those out, so if they are decent enough, I'll catch the 3rd one when it comes out. And this, like, I didn't know it was like an 800-page book, and I got like, I don't know, 50 pages in or something, and I was just like, I've never DNF'd a book in my life. Here we are. We are here. Never. I'm a glutton for punishment. I'm just like, and this is why I encourage people. I'm like, write shorter books. I'm like, because if that book had been under 500 pages, I would have finished it. I would have been like, you know what? I'm going to go finish this book. But it was just like, I just didn't. And, I'm sure I'm not the target demographic for her. But then and then like a couple months later, I was like, I'm super competitive, right? And I'm competitive with myself. So I'm like, okay, I got to give her another shot. Like, I got to see why. And I was like, so let's go back to the book that made her popular, Throne of Glass. And I read that book. And also I want to get in that's like, why do people not like her? Like, what? Like, she's she's so divisive, especially in our corner, like, of like fantasy, sci-fi, like, very divisive. And I read the book, and I was just like, it was good. She's very like, she knows how to write and stuff. It's not my book, it's not a book that's directed towards me. But I'm unbiased enough to know, like, I mean, it's good. And like you said, I feel like when it came out, it filled a niche that was missing, the kind of
Totally.
the really tough girl fantasy romance, a little bit mixture.
Yeah.
And it just blew up. But I was like, it's like, you can't say that she's terrible. Like, it's just, I think most of us are like, well, she's way too popular for what she writes, basically.
For
I
what
think,
happened. I actually like the Throne of Glass series. So I read the first one and liked it. And I read the second one and liked it. And then once I read the third one and got to the third one on, I really enjoyed it. Actually, Andrew has read them all too. So we read them at the same time. Like I read the first couple and was like, you should read these so then I can talk to somebody about them. Because back then I didn't really have anybody else to talk to. And he read them too because they are so readable, right? Like she has a style that kind of helps you pass through the book quickly, which I find is true of a lot of romance or fantasy romance. Just the pacing is a little bit different because they don't focus as much on, you know, the political stuff, or if they do, it's lighter. It's not as in depth. It's, you know, it's easier to kind of float through the books like that. But I really liked it. There are things that Sarah J. Maas does that have now become like Sarah J. Maas specific tropes because she writes the same like twists and tropes into every series, which is, I think, something that people who have read them all, like some people really love that, but that is a complaint for other people. Like, I don't know that I'll enjoy any of her other series as much as I enjoy Throne of Glass because just too many of the same things are happening. It's kind of like reading Terry Brooks. Like you read the original Shannara trilogy, then when you read the next trilogy, you're like, oh, you know, this is happening again. Excellent. Oh, yes, you're writing the same thing again. Like, okay, book 15, another tree. All right, here we go. So it's, you know, she recycles her own tropes, which can be frustrating, I think.
Yeah, I kind of got that with, I don't know if you've read any of the Cradle series.
Not yet. I do have them because I got them when it was like the, you know, he did like the free
the
ebook
free
bundle
all,
or whatever.
all,
Yeah. So I have them on my Kindle, but I have not read them.
Yeah, it's like, and this is another thing in like our corner, like everybody loves, you know, anime and manga, and I'm just like, I of course I grew up when DBZ was in its heyday, you know, and Dragon Ball, and so I love that. And then I don't know, as I kind of, as I got off into the working world and everything, you know, I was like, it's movies or TV. I don't have a lot of time to do too much, right?
Yeah.
And so I just kind of floated away from any anime, and then I tried to come back to it later, and just so much goofy stuff in it, and I can't like, people are like, well, can you just put that off to the side? I'm like, I can't do the big eyes, the fast eating, people falling over whenever they're frustrated, just boink, you know, just falling over and stuff. But I was like, I've heard like Michael Nip was the one that was like championing like Cradle. It's like, Cradle is the best thing ever. It's like anime in a book and every, you know, progression and everything. I was like, okay, maybe I can do this. And to me, it's like, it's an anime without being over. There is some goofy stuff in it, but it's like without being too goofy that I can handle it. And it just took over my year last year. It was crazy. But like you were saying with Sarah J. Maas, it's like they do a lot of the similar things. When I read The Captain, which is going to be his new sci-fi fantasy kind of mixture, it just, and especially he used the same narrator, Travis Baldree, and I'm like, that was probably the bad idea to do the same narrator, because Will White is writing the same as he always does. It's just a different setting, but you have the same voice, and he's doing the same voice he does for the main character and the main character in this book.
Right, so it feels even more similar.
Yeah, I'm like, this book is like, it's like Cradle in Space almost. I'm just like, I love Cradle, but you know, you're expecting a new feeling from a new series.
From a new series. That makes sense.
Like, most people enjoyed The Captain, but like people did have, you know, they're like, well, it's not quite, it's kind of, you know, you're recycling stuff, as you said.
Recycling some tropes. I have never listened to an audiobook narrated by Travis Baldree, but I did hear, I think it must have been on Bookborn's channel, if he did one of her like mean tweet videos. I can't remember if he was one of the people, but that must have been, I think that's where I heard him talk, and I was like, whoa, he must do a really good job because his voice is so nice to listen to.
Yeah, he is that very like smooth. Yeah, like but yeah, and then he just wrote a book, the Legends and Lattes, and then that book blew up.
Yeah.
So now he's like one of the biggest narrators and a big author now, which I'm just like, that's amazing. And I'm like, that's such an awesome gift, is to be able to narrate, because then you're like, I can just narrate my own stuff and people are gonna love it. Like,
Colton wants to know if you've ever watched DBZ Abridged.
Like the show, are we talking just like where they cut out him Goku traveling for 3 days?
So that's Dragon Ball Z Kai, I think it's called. That's where they like take out a lot of the filler, and it's a shorter one. DBZ Abridged is a YouTube show. A group of friends called Team 4-Star put it together, so they redubbed Dragon Ball Z in a more compact form with their own like voices and jokes and stuff, and it is so funny. If you like Dragon Ball Z, it is so funny. Andrew and I listen to it all the time. Like, Andrew was just listening, if Colton is still there and he's listening, we were just listening to the Cell tournament where Goku like hands things over to Gohan. It's like, you have to fight Cell now. And it's just really funny. Like, they make fun of, they really love Dragon Ball Z too, but they make fun of all of the ridiculous parts of Dragon Ball Z and like bring it like way over the top. So it is very crude. Like, it's not you have to be okay with that sense of humor, but it's so funny.
I'm definitely gonna have to check that out. I'm sure my friend Nathan, who was on our Dresden stuff, I'm sure he's watching, because he's even more like, that was our thing. Like, after school, we'd like, all right, get over to Nathan's house. The Dragon Ball Z, the newest episode's about to come on. Like, we were those kids. Like,
so I loved Dragon Ball Z. I liked anime when I was younger. Sailor Moon was like my original.
Oh yeah,
that was like
Tuxedo Mask, all that good stuff.
Yes, when I was young, I loved Sailor Moon. But then I also loved Dragon Ball Z, and I used to watch it on my own. And then the first boy that I ever dated in high school also liked anime, but like he was I guess like a higher tier anime fan than I was. Like, he was even nerdier than I was in that way. And he had them in Japanese. And it was the first time that I had ever watched an anime with subtitles. And so I was like, oh, here I am watching it with the subtitles. Like, I feel so fancy.
Fancy. Oh
right?
My God. Yeah. Well, and I go out to Colorado to Nathan. He lives out in Colorado now, and we go out there every year. And the last time we were out in April, he's like, all right, Joe, here's, we're going to sit down and we're watching all 3 of the Berserk movies or whatever. He's like, I'm going to make you like anime. and I watched it, and you know what? It was more realistic. Yeah, it was a more realistic anime. There are still a couple things in there. Weird. Like that was like one of the weirdest things I've ever watched, especially once you get to the end. I don't know if have you watched Berserk or not?
I have not, actually, and I haven't read it either. Colton will probably comment on this, but I am going to start it before this year is over. I really do want to read Berserk. It is one of the ones that I have not, and I just have never watched the anime because I had not heard good things. Like, people are like, you should really read it instead of watching it. So it is not one that I had ever watched. Like, usually I will watch an anime over reading the manga just because I like watching it. But for Berserk, I have held off, so I don't know. But I have. I mean, it sounds like a trip. So.
Yeah. From what Nathan says, he says the actual anime itself is not very good. Mm-hmm. He said, but the movies are amazing. Like, that's what he's like they don't have the budget in the show, and the show's animation doesn't look as good as it does in the movie. But I was like, for someone who doesn't watch anime, or when I do, I'm just like not that into it. Like, it was solid. I was like, okay, I can get down to this, But again, it's like gets kind of Stephen King, trippy at the end.
I feel like, as someone who doesn't watch a ton, if you don't watch a ton of anime and you like sci-fi, fantasy, horror, Attack on Titan is a good one to try. Like, it is exciting. It's very fast paced. It's like, if that does not pull you in as a like sci-fi, fantasy, horror fan, then there's probably not a ton that you're gonna like. But anime is not for everyone. Like, it is, no matter, like, even if you are watching the grittiest, most adult oriented anime, there's still gonna be some parts where you're like,
Yeah.
here it is.
Yeah. And I think my because I love. Have you watched Love, Death, and Robots on Netflix?
I haven't, but Andrew has, and he really liked it. He
It's all animation, but like whatever animation style they use, it's like the best you've ever seen of that style. It's like
Mhm.
like they must put a lot of money into it, and I really like that. So I'm just like, well, maybe I'll try a little bit different here and there, and maybe I can find something. But yeah, for me, I think it's like hard to connect because I'm like, I want to when I turn on a show, I want to be like invest. That's why I don't like watching 3D. I hate watching 3D stuff because I want to just go in and be sucked in and
don't like the
turn
gimmicks.
off for 2 hours. And that's like one of my a video I did a long time ago got like a lot of responses because for me, if I'm reading, especially if I'm reading sci-fi and fantasy, it should be entertaining. Like I don't want to go into the book and be like, oh, this, you're trying to teach me something about like how I should go through the world or something. Like, no, I want to just go away for hours and just suck
I want
me,
to shut my
suck
brain
me
off.
into a world. Let me forget about politics and all this stuff and just be entertained. And some people were like, oh, and that's not. I'm like, that's all I want out of a book. I just entertain me.
I did not.
Yeah, I heard Joe Abercrombie did. I don't know if that was the Rat episode or one of those. Yeah, but Love, Death, and Robots is awesome. But
I did not know that.
yeah, I want. Yeah, like if I want to be lectured, I'll just read nonfiction. Like or because didn't you? Well, there. See, I don't know if it's nonfiction or if it's like one of those docu fantasy things. It's about dragons. It's like the anatomy of dragons, or
The series that I was reading, A Natural
like
History of Dragons.
Natural History of Dragons. Yeah.
Yeah.
So is that actual fantasy, or is that one of those Maku things? Like,
It is actual fantasy, but it is told. It is a retrospective look at the life of a dragon naturalist. So in this world, there are dragons, and we follow a woman named Isabella Trent, and she is now elderly and looking back on her life when you know at the beginning of the book that she is famous, like she is an internationally renowned dragon naturalist, and she's looking back at the beginning of her life. And the book is kind of like the world that it is set in is kind of the equivalent of like, I don't know, 19th century Earth, and she is from like the Great Britain of Earth.
okay.
And so the countries all kind of correspond to like different places on Earth, and it's like a lot of the social issues are the same. Like it's very much like women are not allowed to be members of the university, they're not allowed to hold positions like that in society, they are beholden to their husbands, and she is this very atypical young girl who's obsessed with dragons, and she wants to be a naturalist. And so we follow her throughout her life, and she's like writing a biography basically.
Now I think I could get down to that. That's pretty cool.
It is so good. I love it.
I know Tony from an Erudite Adventure read that recently, and he loved it because he's like all in anything dragon he can get his hands on.
Excellent.
Oh, my brain drain just went. Yeah. Well, that's. I did an interview with Richard Kadrey, who's the author of the Sandman Slim series, and he wrote for Marvel. Wrote the Lucifer series. Like I think he actually was the one that ended that series in the comic books.
Oh wow.
And Jim Butcher's done Spider-Man. It's pretty cool how these authors kind of get around into other like mainstream, pop culture stuff.
Entertainment. I really liked the first season of Good Omens. I have not seen the second season yet, just because I do want to watch it. I will watch it at some point. Sandman, the TV show, I have not watched yet. but I will probably also watch that at some point. And Doctor Who, I watched like bits and pieces of. So I watched the 9th and 10th Doctors, but not really anything other than that.
Yeah, I watched David Tennant and Matt Smith, and then I watched a little bit of the Doctor that came after them.
I could not get on board with Matt Smith. I'm like, I know that he is lovely, and I have heard that he did really
want to be a
in
ginger.
the Game of Thrones show that came out.
Oh yeah.
I heard he was really good in that. But I loved David Tennant as the Doctor, and I was not. It was just such a jarring change, and I could not get into it. I was like, nope, I'm signing out now. Goodbye, Doctor Who.
The first thing I saw David Tennant in after he was the Doctor was as the Purple Man in the Netflix MCU show. Jessica Jones. Such a great bad guy. I was like, he is amazing. He's a great actor.
Mm-hmm.
Matt Smith is glorious. I thought I didn't read it. I was just skimming, and I thought you wrote gorgeous. I was thinking. I was like, yeah. My wife thinks he's pretty hot too. Yeah. So. I feel like anime. All right. What are we doing here? What am I supposed to watch?
Princess Mononoke is one of the like Studio Ghibli films. It is really good.
And
it is nice. Like if you like Earthsea and that kind of like nature-based, whimsical feeling fantasy, you probably would like Princess Mononoke. Have you seen Howl's Moving Castle? I feel like that's the one animated movie that everybody has seen.
No, I remember watching. I don't know. I would have been, it would have been 15 years ago. I think I watched Spirited Away.
Mm-hmm.
That was like one of my while I was still kind of into anime, and I remember it being really good. But yeah, I don't think I've heard of that one. I'm gonna have to have you guys compile me a list, and I'll just start trying some of these out and seeing if I can find. So Attack on Titan. It will be one. I know my wife has talked about Attack on Titan so recently, so I think she wants to, so I was like, all right, guys, I will try it while she's watching. I'll tell her she can't watch it without me, at least the first few episodes.
It'll become a couple's activity.
Chris Fitz, I admitted being that's, oh my gosh. See, Sarah, you start talking about the writing fanfic, paranormal romance. Now
this is what I bring to
this is what you have done. This is what you have done.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh. So I don't want to keep you too much longer because I know you're like an hour and a half ahead of me. So
I know my time zone. It's always late.
You know what? I'm going to be honest. I didn't know that there was half-hour time differences on time zones. I was not aware that we had this because I remember for one of the dress-in things, you were like, yeah, I'm an hour and a half ahead. I'm like, a half? But what are you doing? Do you have any videos planned coming up or any other interviews or stuff you're doing?
Once the kids go back to school, I will go back to regularly making booktube videos. So that is a plan. I want to do a video for the books that everybody picked for me, talking about them, going through them. I'm not going to do a wrap up of everything that I read over the months that I was not on booktube, but I will wrap up those books because I want to talk about them and, just let people know what I thought about them. So I am going to do that. I do have a couple of videos that I have planned that I really would like to make that are going to take a little bit more effort. So I have tried to put together a list of essential fantasy. So if you were coming in as I did, for example, having not read any modern fantasy, which books do I feel are essential to understanding fantasy as a genre and what has been new, what books have had a big impact, all of those kinds of things. And they're not necessarily books that I like or books, a couple of them I haven't even read, but I just think if you want to have a comprehensive, if you want to do well on Book Jeopardy, if you want to have a comprehensive idea of what is
what are the ones?
in fantasy, then read these books. And I have 3 lists for that. So I have one for modern, one for classic, and one for kind of like foundational fantasy. And they're all like, I have all the books picked out, but I just want to plan how exactly I'm going to put that together. So I would like to do that, but I want it to look nicer maybe than my videos usually look, because my production value is not high most of the time, which I'm fine with.
Yeah.
But I would like to at least organize those in a way that looks nice. So I want to do that. I have dairy. I want to do, so I actually have recorded a video that I was going to put up, and then this doesn't happen often. Like I don't usually have issues with it, but there was something wrong with my iPhone because I just record them all on my phone, and I lost it, or it like was corrupted, or like something happened to it that I couldn't load it. But it was a video about, I have a bunch of plans to do videos for my favorite authors' favorite books and the books that inspired them.
That's a good idea.
So the one that I had filmed was about Neil Gaiman, which I thought would pair well because I have a video, like a guide to Neil Gaiman, like what you should read and how it all fits together for his novels, not for his comic books. So I have a Neil Gaiman loves kind of video. So like 5 books that inspired him as an author. And like, if you like, for example, the way that I organized that video when I recorded it the first time, and I guess I will do it the second time, I picked like a bunch of different Neil Gaiman books. I was like, if you like American Gods and Anansi Boys and Norse mythology, you should read this book that Neil Gaiman loves. And if you like instead like Neverwhere, then you should read this book that Neil Gaiman loved, and tried to organize it in that way. So like, these are the books that influenced him. This is why these books, like these are the parts of these books that I can see in Neil Gaiman's writing. And these are the books of Neil Gaiman's that kind of most correspond with those selections. And I have a bunch of authors that I have done that for. So I also have one for Stephen King. I have one for Joe Abercrombie. I have like, there's authors who do a lot of interviews. Like Robin Hobb, for example, was really hard to do that for, because she almost never gives interviews or talks about like the books that inspired her or that she loves. But I for the authors that do talk a lot about what inspired them, then I think that would be fun. And they obviously have to be authors that I know well, because I need to be able to be like, yes, this is where I see this person's influence in their writing. So that is also a series that I would like to do, and I am ready to do it for at least a couple of people. And then like, I just want to get back into doing the regular videos. I'd be happy enough on BookTube doing a TBR and like a wrap up, because I just like talking to people. It's the same people that watch my videos all the time. And I'm happy with that, because I like the people who watch my videos. No one watches them, because, it's just the same like group of friends. And I just like hearing from them and being like, yeah, what have you guys read this month?
Yeah. Well, and like I'll watch, I need that video from you, because I'll watch Book Jeopardy, and I'm just like, man, I really need to get some of these foundational series under my belt. Like I made a video about like 10 series that everybody seems to have read, and I haven't touched any of them. So I'm like working my way in there. I got the First Law. I just finished Mistborn. I'm starting Jade. Is it Jade Legacy? Is that the trilogy? Is that the name of the trilogy?
Greenbone Saga is the name.
Greenbone Saga. There we go. Yeah. So I'm trying to get into some of these, because I'm just like, no one can be.
It's true. No, you can't prepare for that. There's no preparation for perhaps.
So yeah, I was like, yeah, I could not be on Book Jeopardy right now. I was like, I do not have the depth of knowledge that some of you have. But I love watching it.
Part of what prepares you for Book Jeopardy, I have like a thing about lists. I love lists. I have so many lists of like famous books, classic books. You should read these books. I love to read the like who's nominated for the award. So even if I haven't read them, like the titles are there.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
Absolutely. And because Alan is so good at writing the questions, and I'm not saying that because he's in the chat, but because he is so good at writing the questions, they're like real Jeopardy questions. So if you like Jeopardy, it helps with Book Jeopardy, because Jeopardy questions have clues in the question. Like there are clues about what the title is, or hinting at what is going to happen. Like there will be a certain word that's used, and it will spark an association. And that is what is helpful. Like tons of the books I have not read, but I know what the titles are, and then I know what Alan is trying to like lead
Trying to get you to go. Yeah.
Except for like, there's no leading you to perhaps. Perhaps is like, this is like the contents of Alan's brain, like blended up and then like spat out on paper in like the most random assortment of clues. It's true, Alan. Your life, you would be an excellent trivia show writer.
Yeah, Alan. I am waiting desperately for the narration of The Way of Edan. So I'm gonna jump all over that and review. I'm gonna review your work once you get that done.
Mm-hmm. I know. I did not get the Song of Achilles question. Ultimate sadness.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, it's about time for me to get some food. This has been amazing. I'll have to figure out a way. You know, you were with me for that almost an entire year with Dresden.
That was so much fun. With
that was like
I just remembered another animal companion. I knew this was going to happen. Sophocles from the Red Rising series, little fox. So good. Sorry. I was like, as soon as you started talking, I'll be thinking of them all night. You'll be getting messages on Instagram from me being like, actually, this one too, and this one too.
I know that always happens, especially when I'm like really enjoying. Like I'm like, oh, I should have asked this. We should have talked about that. You know. So we'll definitely have to find something else that we're getting into and get work together again, because that's absolutely one of my favorite things. I'm like one of those people, like you were talking about, authors that do a lot of interviews. Jim does a lot of interviews, but he has such a big like hardcore fan base that all his interviews devolve into people asking him theories. Like, so it's like yeah, we get that's great about your childhood, but like, what is going on here? Like, let us know. I
need you to validate this like obscure cascading theory that I have about what's going to happen 4 books from now.
Oh my gosh. But yes, thank you so much for coming on. I can't wait to see your new videos. And I know, like you said, once the kids go back, Sarah will be back in full force. And
true.
And we all, as you can see in the comments, people cannot wait to have you back, throwing out some awesome videos again. All right. Well, thank you all for jumping on.